Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are here to hear from three entrepreneurs who have developed products right here in New Haven, Connecticut. They're going to give us their experience and their insights. The hope is that we'll elaborate or we'll demonstrate that there are many different pathways to taking a concept as to a prototype and then moving it into actually a product that people can use in their everyday lives. So without further ado, I'm going to go through and just have each of the panelists say hello before we go into a longer discussion of each of their individual journeys. So first we have Erick Rios. Do you want to say hello, Erick?
Hello, everybody. My name is Erick Rios. I'm a professional product designer. I've been doing this for almost, well, not more than 15. I guess I keep rounding down since 2003. I have launched about 200 and, well, original one's about 130 products. With derivatives, almost 200 products right now that you can go buy on the shelf. So hoping to share some of the things that I've learned, and I always look forward to learning from inventors like Daryl and Ellen that actually start from scratch. So we will hear some similarities and some very different things when you do it like I do as a profession versus as an inventor or a startup. So look forward to chatting more and discussing things with you.
Great. And Daryl, we'll go next to you.
Hi, I'm Daryl Minchenko. I'm a two-time award-winning inventor. I have a few products that are out there that I licensed to a couple of companies. And my journey started from scratch. I used my dream kit, which basically gave me an idea and a focusing point on how to start a file that I was able to put in front of a investor and in front of companies. That's it.
Great. We'll be hearing more. Ellen, do you want to say hello to the group?
Yeah. Awesome. Hello, I'm Ellen. I am somewhat product designer, mostly working in the medical device and startup space. So some unique challenges there, which have definitely been interesting to go through. I started my own company back in 2014 and actually sold that at the end of last year to another medical device startup company. So now I work with them as their chief product officer.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, I'll be looking forward to hearing in more detail from all of you, but let's start with Erick. So give us a story about your journey.
Well, I almost stumbled into my profession by luck. I was on my senior year, was working on a team project, and I happened to get assigned an advisor from a company called IDEO, which is a professional product design consultancy. And I really got good chemistry going with her. She became a mentor. She offered me an internship that's with IDEO, which I went and took, and quickly discovered that doing product design over and over again, although most people will think it's masochist, I actually enjoyed it a lot. I like going back to the drawing board and starting again, and the fact that I get to bring something to market and somebody goes and purchase it, or somebody, if it's a medical product, it goes on to help somebody in a surgical suite or at the doctor office. Really, it's the reward that I look for in life. So that was the beginning of the journey. I've been doing it ever since, and if I do my job well, I've convinced somebody like any of you to buy a new product that maybe they didn't need, or maybe they've been thinking about. If I do my job really well, I've convinced you to replace a product that you already have with something new that we've designed or have introduced to make your life a little bit better. There's good and bad to product design. I mean, I've designed many. When I started my career, there was a lot of disposables, which certainly have a place and a time, but also creates a lot more trash. So as the journey has gone on, I've grown and learned, and I've tried to find products that I feel have a better impact in society. And there's some things that should be disposable, other things that shouldn't. Nowadays, I mostly advise startups and some Fortune 500s on how to commercialize a particular product. Yes, design is involved with that, but design is only part of what makes a product. There's a lot more to it, from what is the branding, who's going to buy it, where you're going to buy it, how you're going to get it to them. So I have a team of about 8 to 10 people that help me bring these things to market. Also, the way I'm associated with MakeHaven, I love, because I got into this from my mentor, I like giving back. And so I like spending time at MakeHaven with seeing all the young entrepreneurs starting the journey. Others not so young, like Ellen. I met Ellen a few years back, and she's been doing great with her startup. And just giving back to the community so that more people can figure out how to bring things to market.
Excellent. And when you are looking for improvements in a product, what's your process? How do you start to go down that road? Someone comes with you a problem, or?
So in my case, typically the majority of the time a product already exists, or the invention has already happened, and we're just trying to make it work better or sell better or fit better. So the first thing we do is we call it the foundation, is we try to understand what is the situation, or where is the product at. And sometimes we discover that it's that the problem is that it doesn't connect with the user. There's not enough touch points that the user can relate to. Other times it could be a branding problem, or it could be a manufacturing problem. So it's very important not to assume that you know the answer, but to let the users and let the people that you're working with tell you what the problems are, right? And identify those problems and then try to solve them. Majority of the time, say if it's a consumer product, it's about finding unmet needs, right? It's kind of like what you see. People cannot tell you what they don't know. People cannot tell you what the next solution is. So by observing them, by seeing them use your product, interact with your product, or if you don't have a product yet, with your competitors' products, or with a prototype that you build, you can understand kind of like what are the things that are bothering them, slowing them down, getting in the way. And then you can start trying to see, is there enough value for me to solve them? Sometimes, and let's be honest, the thing that keeps a lot of people from really commercializing is they want a perfect solution. And there's no such thing. You can't solve every problem. It's not economical to solve every problem. Some things you just have to accept that they'll remain there. But you can make them, the ones that you can solve, you can start tweaking and solving and then adding solutions to. And that helps you round up your product, because at the end of the day, your product should do one thing well. And hopefully as the inventor, you've already figured that out. If you don't, you really have some soul searching to do, because that I take for granted. If you don't have that, a lot of times I will usually point that out to you, and really there won't be an engagement, if you will, that I will be involved in, because that's important. But then around that, there's there's a lot of other little things that make you happy. I mean, it starts. You've all seen it. You get this nice new present for yourself, and you get the box, and you're so excited about it, and you look at all the shiny surfaces, and then you open it, and you find this little thing that tickles you happy. And those kind of things is what we're looking for. Other times the problem is in the manufacturing. You know, how do we make it? How do we get it? How do you make sure that it fits everybody? That it's the right size. How do you source it close enough that you can respond to all the challenges? So I would say if you're at a state where you have your idea, it's working, then you need to think of it as a whole package and start thinking about it. Imagine yourself as your users and see what they see and what things would motivate them to be interested in your product.
And so you talk about stumbling blocks and manufacture. Can you describe some of the challenges, perhaps, in knowing what type of manufacturer is appropriate, or what are the barriers that you have seen as people move that prototype into manufacturing setting?
We assume that you can just give something to a company and that they'll just ship your product back, and that's not a reality. Everybody has their own. Just like you should design something that does one thing well, most manufacturers have their own expertises. So the first question is, how am I going to make this? What processes do I use? And the challenge there is there's so many processes out there that can be overwhelming. So there's some time and effort taken on at the beginning of it. It's like, how, when, where do I make this? Another stumbling block that's ever more relevant now is the language barrier and the distance barrier, because a lot of our manufacturing expertise has moved to Southeast Asia, and that creates its own difficulties getting things transported, translating, making sure they see and act. I mean, the culture is completely different, so the way they approach things is different than ours. So that cultural barrier has to be broached. Even if you manufacture in the U.S., you still have there's different steps to launching that product. I guess you're first going to do your own prototypes, especially if you're in this call from MakeHaven, right? You probably will make your first few prototypes, and that's all and good and easy. You can get an idea how much that will cost. Next, you need to figure out how do you make your initial production. You're on your alpha run, and now it's not longer a prototype. So you have to make sure that it can be made repeatable and that it will all look the same and that you can inspect them, that they're going to all work and all those things. Then you need to figure out how you're going to really start scaling up, right? I mean, that first production run might be maybe 50 to 100 copies, but ultimately for this to work, you're going to have to make thousands of them. So now you start talking a lot larger amount of dollars, and you have to be sure that you know what you're committing to and what that means. Because not only do you have to buy the tools, you have to buy the inventory for them to make it, and the time that it takes to make them, and the shipping container that you're going to get it to you, and the warehouse. Where are you going to keep all these things? A lot of us end up at the beginning maybe keeping it in your garage, but that quickly, if it's working, that quickly will go out of fashion. And so it is a journey, really, to make something a reality that is mass produced. It's different if you're doing something that's crafty, but when you're trying to mass produce a particular widget in the tens of thousands, there's a journey that you have to walk through.
So my last question, Erick, is what advice would you give the young you entering as a professional into this prototype and product development world? Is there anything you've learned that you think would have been wisdom for that younger person? It's interesting. Is we as a product designer, and I don't know how many in the call would be interested. If you are, you're happy to follow up with me, and I'll help you get down that path. We're in an interesting time in that when I began, most people did not know what product design was. You would meet somebody, you say, I'm a product designer, I'm an industrial designer, whatever, and they will look at you like, what? What does that mean? What do you do? So now they'll know what that is. They'll relate to it. The interesting thing probably to keep in mind now is that you need to be careful not to be considered an artist. There is a distinction between product design, but product design is more than just, an artist in my mind is designing just for the pure joy of it. When you want to switch into product design, when you're a designer instead of an artist, you are ultimately conscious that this is a business. Somebody has to make money and a living from it. It's kind of like it's akin to an architect and a civil engineer, right? There's different types of architects. Some are more artistic than others, but you ultimately, the more successful ones are the ones that are going to make it longer in the career. You have to think of this as a business. There is an end goal to this. You have to consider how what you're doing impacts not just your bottom line, but the bottom line of the people that you're working with and for. And nowadays, you don't have to. The only choice is not to be a consultant. Like when I started, there's many companies that have, like Ellen just said, she's the chief product person. There's many companies that are bringing in product designers in-house to consider how they
what products to make and how those products look. So it's exciting. It's changed a lot, and I hope that more people join the industry. As more people join the industry, we flourish into a bigger category, if you will. But think of this: it's still a business. Most of your bosses are business-minded people, and where we fail a lot is where I've seen it happen so many times. We pick fights, and the fight is because we feel that this is going to make somebody's life better, or we feel that this is just such a better design, and they forget that the fundamentals at the end of the day is a balance between cost, time. I mean, there's only so many things you can do. So either something's going to cost more, it's going to take more time, or it might not have all the things that you want in it, right? So you have to balance between yourself and even for myself, sometimes I get hung up and it's like it has to be that way or no way, and that's when you start getting into trouble as a product designer.
Excellent, Eric. Well, that's sage advice. I think we'll move on to Daryl, who will need to unmute himself since there was some background noise. So, Daryl, you want to unmute yourself? If not, we might jump to Ellen while that... Oh,
Here we are.
Yeah. Go ahead, Daryl.
Hi, I'm here at MakeHaven. I guess I could probably say what happened to me was, like Eric, my story is a little different. But we all have a beginning. My beginning started on a golf course. And I came up with my first idea. And I stumbled upon it. I put it away. I was going to send it to Davidson. I got the packet. But I never sent it away because I thought they weren't ready for the type of thing that I had discovered. Becoming an entrepreneur or an inventor is basically discovering a problem. Once you discover that there's a problem and you come up with the way to fix it, believe it or not, you're an inventor. So my approach to this is not, it's about discovering inside you what comes out of you. Because anybody that solves a problem, it could be a product or a service that you can put in front of an investor or a company. And what I did was I made it very simplistic for myself, because to me, I knew there was a way to kind of like go over the river without building a bridge, because I knew there were things out there that already existed. So I discovered the licensing industry years after I have done everything that Eric depicted in the beginning, because I had an investor that didn't really know what to do. So we were both like organic in this. We didn't know all the different avenues. So I put everything together by trial and error, and eventually jumped on the licensing industry. I'm sure Eric knows all about that, but you don't really have to control anything there. If they like your product, they're going to make the product, and then you sit down and sign the contract and make sure that the residual, the percentage that you get, is pretty reasonable. When you're dealing with this type of industry, you get up to 3 to 6% if you don't have a patent. A lot of people don't know that. If you do have a patent, you can haggle for 6 to 10%. If you have an electronic product, you can go as high as 14. Basically, it's whatever terms you end up with that company. But electronics stuff, as I'm sure that Eric knows, is more. You get more percentage on the back end of the royalties. But if you have your whole package together, as far as the patent, the trademark, they use your name, you can get up to at least 10 to 12%. And that's pretty substantial, considering the fact that you just had an idea come out of your head. So that's basically what I've done. Besides the other ventures that I do, when it comes to prototyping, before MakeHaven, I used to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and put some of the parts together to show the design of the concept that I came up with. And then I videotape it, and then I send it in to the companies. And I tell you what to do in my dream kit. You could go to my website, which is darylmanchenko.com, and download the free dream kit. I also sell the licensing kit and campaign kit, which kind of gives you more education about what moves you need to make when it comes to doing something like Eric said, when you want to do product development. I suggest you start off on a real rudimentary level, because to jump into a product to develop it yourself, if you don't have the revenue behind it. I was lucky. Let me tell this story so you can kind of get where I went with it. I ran into my investor, and he was actually a millionaire. His pockets were loaded, but what I did was I put together the campaign kit because I wanted him to know that I knew how to market this thing and get it out there. So once he knew that I knew how to market it and get it out with my campaign kit, he sent me to China by myself. So I went to China by myself. I stayed there for 29 days, and I actually came back with the product tooled up. So I'm sure if I could do those type of things, that anyone can do the same thing. I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box or the brightest bulb in the drawer, but what I did learn was your problem-solving techniques that you have come up with in your life, that is probably your best, how you say, tool, and you can do this. It's not something that you can't do. It's just something that you never have done, and that's the kind of approach that I took. And believe it or not, people, I would like to say this, that original idea when I was playing golf with an older gentleman and saw something, I've never developed that product. What happens is when you start thinking like this, solving problems, it becomes like a snowball. Your thoughts get bigger and bigger. The problems that you solve, once you resolve them, you end up discovering other things. It kind of grows tentacles on you. Like in my situation now, I'm not really dealing with physical, tangible products now. I've actually converted over to the digital world. And all I have to say to you guys is once you start this type of thinking, you basically really can't stop. And I encourage anyone that has an idea, don't give up on the idea. If you come to a wall, just put it on the shelf, and I guarantee you within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it takes, you're going to come up with the solution to that problem. And,
so
that's what I really believe in.
Daryl, one thing that might be interesting is just describe the early prototyping you described at Home Depot. So your product is a yard game, right? And it essentially is these big pipes and rings and things like that. And so tell me how you went through that process of doing the really rough prototypes and how you got feedback on those.
Well, the funny story about Teeter Toss, the one that I licensed out, I got back from Pittsburgh when I won my first award, and I was like, how can I improve this product so that, I can secure its longevity. And so what I did was I said, if I could get the tube to move or spin, that'd be a new game. And believe it or not, this is a true story. I had some of the parts around the office that I was working out of, and I put together some of the parts, and it actually worked right then and there. And this is crazy because what I did was I put it away. And then 8 years later, when I tried to introduce my soft toss golf, if you YouTube me, you can see how I developed that and went through that process in the China film. I introduced soft toss golf to Gopher Sport, and they said they really weren't ready for it because it had a lot of parts It wasn't simple. So I had teeter toss stored away for 8 years in the basement. And immediately I said, aha, I got something I think you'd be interested in. And teeter toss was my breakthrough product. So I think it's just your will. And you can go to places like hardware stores and get some of the parts that will depict the design and the concept that you want the investor or the company to see the picture. Once they see the concept and the design, they're going to torque it and do what they think is more efficient as far as money-wise, as far as it. Because what they did with teeter toss, they didn't have the spinning going on that I engineered out of scraps. It just teeters back and forth. So I really think that you can, like Erick was saying, you don't really overthink things, because people will help you add on or take away from it. So you have to really just use your ingenuity. Like I said, you can solve the problem. You'll just be able to create another one for them that they'll break down, and then they'll be able to choose what they want out of the product and what they can afford, because most companies have a budget.
Yep.
You know, so you don't want to go over budget.
So one thing, so you have done licensing, and I know you're not a lawyer and not in a position to give any sort of official advice on it. Right. But I do see a lot of fear as people have ideas, and when can they show them to a company? How can they share them? So in your personal experience, what did you do to protect yourself as you're approaching this company? Was it just good faith that they didn't take it from you? How did you ensure that you would be entitled to those residuals from the sales?
Well, the licensing industry is kind of different. You don't have to have a patent to have a company license out your idea, because what most companies do nowadays is, once they get the brand and they get the market, they really don't care who makes another product, because they are sustaining their sales with their market, so they're comfortable with that, unless it's a great product, you know. But what I did was, I got a non-provisional a provisional patent for $60, and then I turned around and I, as they say, I have the company sign a non-disclosure document. If you have them sign an NDA before, most companies are going to have you sign that first, and that's how I basically secured the deal with the companies. You always have to have. Even my investor, I had him sign non-disclosure document. Even to this day, like the company that I'm dealing with now, with the intellectual property that I do have, with the digital property, the first thing that I have done is I make sure that they sign a non-disclosure document. And that's basically the only security that you're going to have. I was very fearful in the beginning, but you have to realize, you have to, you know, let that go. The fear of it is probably going to be your hardest obstacle, is to trust people and trust the industry. And my frame of mind was like, you have to take this frame of mind. A company that's already out there, a Fortune 500 company, they're not going to take your idea from you if they sign that non-disclosure document, because your product's not even made yet. And why would they risk their name and their brand around a product that you developed that they're not going to take your product? I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. If they do, then you're going to have a long, drawn-out fight in court, and most of the time they'll end up settling. But who wants to wait 2, 3, 4 years down the line? Because that's what they would do. They'll drag it out. They'll get all the money they can out of the market, and then once you win, you really don't get any of the money that they have made off of it. You'll just get your rights back. So I know a lot of people that have patents and they don't make any money off of it. So that's why I really encourage people to go the licensing route, because you're going to have your product out there for as long as they sell to their market. And anyway, if you have a product that they're going to, how do they say, what's the word, bootleg in China, that means you have a successful product. I learned that from reading it in Business Weekly, that once you have a product that's being knocked off, you don't have to worry about it because they're going to sell it at a lower rate. And it's not even to your market. It'll basically be to the flea market. So these things you don't have to worry about. And the company that takes on your venture or your product or service, they already know that. So they're not worried about it. I don't think you should be worried about it.
Yeah, what I think I'm hearing is go for it. That, you know, the opportunity lost by not taking a chance and not moving forward, if you let yourself be impeded by all the things that could happen, it will never be realized. And so my last question for you, Daryl, is the same one for Eric, which is if you could go back to the beginning of your journey and give yourself one piece of wisdom, a little bit of advice, do you know what that advice would be?
My advice would be read up on licensing and try to educate yourself and be able to jump out the window. You know, my saying is, and it's an old saying, is if you want something you never had, you have to do something you've never done. So get over the fear factor and just do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Daryl. We'll come back with questions for everyone, but I'm going to move on to Ellen. Ellen, would you take us through your journey?
Yeah, awesome. So my journey went a little bit differently, mostly because I started off in the medical field, which is a lot more restrictive. Not where I would recommend first-time inventors start out. But yeah, so my background, I was always interested more on the arts side of things. So I started off actually in college as a fine arts major, and watched a really great documentary and got really interested in product design. So it was Objectified, which is a really great documentary in a series of 3 that talk through kind of design and the world. So that one, it talks to people who design the products around us. IDEO is featured very heavily, and so I was learned about them through that. Got really interested in design, in particular, a kind of vertical called human-centered design, which I think we've heard a lot of the principles from Eric and Daryl as well, but it's really focusing on solving problems and thinking about who you're working with. It's really centering that product development process around people. And it's not just product development, it's sort of anything. So you really kind of center those processes around human beings, around people, and the problem that you're trying to solve for them, and kind of what they're trying to accomplish and helping them accomplish that. So was kind of trying to learn about it in college, took a bunch of engineering classes just to learn how to make things and develop those skills. And so that's where I got introduced to a lot of kind of the prototyping skills and the rapid prototyping. Started doing a lot of 3D printing, laser cutting, hand tools, power tools. Also started doing 3D modeling. So using programs like SolidWorks, but there's plenty of free alternatives as well. So I started off wanting to go into kind of physical product development. Basically had a good friend of mine who was more on the engineering side of things who wanted to, who was also interested in doing this. And so we basically applied for a fellowship through Yale to work with their engineering department and essentially have funding through the summer to develop a project to kind of focus on some sort of technological innovation. So we basically got access to the makerspace over there, which has a lot of the same tools that MakeHaven does. I think MakeHaven actually covers more tools and more capabilities for sure. And so we were able to do kind of we started off with a problem, so we actually didn't have an idea of what we were working on. And so with the process with human-centered design, we basically started out doing research. So the first phase of it was just understanding the people that we were working with and the problem that we were solving with them. And so we were focusing particularly on scoliosis in kids who have scoliosis. So it's a curvature of the spine, typically manifests during adolescence. The way it's typically treated is with a back brace, and if that doesn't work, then you have to go in for spinal fusion surgery. So it's a really expensive and a very impactful surgery that you want to avoid as much as possible. And my co-founder, Levi, had scoliosis when he was younger, which is why we decided to focus on it. And so, through that process of trying to understand how things were treated, we talked to doctors, we talked to physical therapists, we shadowed patients in support groups. And so we got to learn a lot about the condition. We got to learn, why a kid wouldn't wear a back brace, which, it's large, it's bulky, they're teenagers, and so they don't want to. But also, figuring out how kids feel about surgery and, what's being communicated to them through that treatment process. How are their kind of emotional needs being met? How do they feel about going through treatment? Again, as human beings. And then also, what are the priorities of the doctors? What are the priorities of their parents? Thinking about, how can we make that treatment process better? And from that, we drew out a couple of insights. After we did all this research and listened to what people were saying and looked at the clinical research as well, we then looked at, what could we do here to make that process better? Where are there opportunities to improve this treatment process? And so we decided to focus on, making sure that people actually understood what the brace was doing and also being able to keep track of how long the brace was being worn, connecting that to software and connecting the doctors into that process so that you could keep track of patients, you could make sure that people who needed attention got that attention and weren't slipping through the cracks, and patients that were doing well could potentially, be adjusted so that they didn't have to wear the brace as much. So those are some of the things that we were looking at. So we developed essentially a smart strap for a back brace that can tell how long and how tight the brace is being worn. We went through a lot of iterations of prototyping. So it was a constant process of making a prototype, learning something from it, going back, incorporating, improving the prototype, going back to other people. So it was definitely not done in a vacuum. There was a lot of back and forth with patients, with doctors. We would video conference with people, show them what we were working on. And we actually started really small. So we started with a pencil sketch. So I drew a picture of a kid with a back brace with a strap on it. And we just told people, here's what this strap would look like. Here's what it would do. What's interesting about this to you? Could you see yourself using this? And kind of as we were going through this, it was really actually helping people imagine what the product might look like if they actually had it in their hands and if they are actually using it. So each of our prototypes was getting closer and closer to that. And we kind of took two different paths. So one set of our prototypes was looking at, can we help people imagine what it will look like? And so we made these basically just chunks of plastic that were 3D printed that looked really sleek and nice. And so we would put that on a brace and we'd say, pretend that this is doing something. And so they could imagine themselves wearing that product or interacting with that product. And then on the other side, we were also working in parallel on getting a prototype that worked. So we could help people imagine what it was actually doing. And the eventual goal is to get the looks like and the works like prototype into the same package. And so we would be working on actually making those functions that people were telling us were necessary and getting them to actually work. So we were pretty systematic with our prototyping, and we were doing it really cheap to start out. So we were 3D printing pieces. We were using Arduinos, so that we weren't diving too deep into kind of the technical realm until we figured out what we really needed. Kind of after that iteration, Levi taught himself Eagle and how to lay out a circuit board. And we were working on, actually designing stuff to be injection molded. So we started going down that path. And so it would have been a lot for us to learn right off the bat, but because we were doing it in these cycles, we knew kind of each step, we got a little bit better. We understood what we were building a little bit more, and we were able to develop those skills to actually build higher fidelity prototypes. an interesting thing there is like we actually started diving into software at that point. So I ended up switching focus and making use of a lot of my graphic design skills into designing user interfaces for the software and the apps. And that actually follows a very similar process. So prototyping an app, I start actually with a lot of sticky notes to understand how people are interacting with the app, what they need, what are the kind of features we're developing, turning that into these paper sketches of how is the app going to be laid out, showing those to people, and then turning that into kind of digital mock-ups. And that's all before anybody with any software experience, software development experience comes in. And so, you know, before you even have a software developer or before you start diving into learning how to code, you can actually build a really nice mock-up of an app that you can actually test with people and get feedback on, so that you're not having to kind of redevelop a lot of things through that process. So yeah, so we developed the prototype. We got to the point where, you know, we weren't able to build any more of them. So we needed to make, you know, a few hundred of them where we couldn't solder up the boards ourselves, and we needed an actual physical case. So we started talking to manufacturers. I would say this is a spot where we kind of tripped up a little bit. So we started talking to, and also where medical devices, I think it's a little bit different because we have to meet very, very high standards in our manufacturing and our processes. So a lot of the manufacturers that we talked to were very, very expensive. And that's, you know, that's something where our prototyping process slowed down a lot. So we had to put in a lot of money up front, and we had to put in a lot of time to actually get kind of a piece. And each iteration then took a lot longer and got a lot more expensive. And so that's where, you know, having investors is very, very helpful, and also having mentors and people on your team who have experience with medical devices and product development is really crucial. I've been with the new company I've actually been working with. They actually started off by going to China very early on, and working directly with the factories there. And they're able to work very quickly and very nimbly. And so they actually went through the work to actually get that factory certified for medical device development. So that's definitely another way to go, where the initial manufacturing can actually be a lot cheaper. And so they, you know, if you're making large quantities of products, it's, as much as you can try to do it in the US, it's very, very difficult. It's still possible, but you know, it's the price and the speed is just, it's hard to compare with doing it in China. Hopefully, you know, we can move more of that back to the US. I'm seeing more small scale, especially these kind of like medium or small runs of manufacturing level prototypes. Some of that's actually moving back to the US, which is really great to see. But yeah, that's my story.
Excellent, Ellen. And I think with your story, you had several stages because you're working on these prototypes where you needed additional funding. And so can you tell us just a little bit about at what stage were you operating with no external funding? When did you decide you needed to get additional support, and how did you approach that?
Yeah, so the early days, we did a lot of grant funding. We also applied to a lot of like pitch competitions, conferences, things where we could pick up, you know, $5,000 here, you know, $1,000 there. That was able to get us through our early days of prototyping. And essentially, it was again cyclical and tied to our prototyping. So how much funding could we get with the prototype that we had in order to develop a better prototype that would help us learn more? So we had to really figure out and get in the investors' heads to say, what are the things that we need to have to make us an investable company? What are we targeting the right market size? What kind of validation do we need? Do we need clinical evidence? Do we need a really great mentor to sign on, or an advisor on board? Do we need to show these, you know, 5 functions? Do we need to file a patent? So we figure out, you know, what are the questions that investors are asking when we talk to them, especially the ones that say, okay, yeah, you're too early for us, you're too small, you know, we're really targeting this. And so we'd say, okay, here's all the things that we need to get to in order to get more funding, but also in order to launch the product. And so then we would look at, okay, what can we do with our prototyping, and what do we need to test and learn to be able to approach them then and say, look, you said we needed these things. we've gone through and knocked out some of these. We'll need some funding to knock out the other parts of your wish list. And so that's kind of how we directed some of our prototyping and fundraising efforts. So we actually went through angel investment, and because we're in the medical devices phase, and particularly in pediatric devices, there's a lot of grant funding kind of in there. So we applied to a lot of grants. So we started picking up around like $25,000 grant awards to start developing more of those prototypes. And then we actually got a fair amount of funding from the state of Connecticut, who has the CT Innovations, which invests in startups that are based out of Connecticut. So they helped support us for a lot of the prototyping that we were doing. And on the flip side, we had to show them that we were targeting a market, kind of sales growth and manufacturing growth, getting pre-orders, for example, but having enough of a device there to actually show people so that people would be encouraged to pre-order, helping people imagine what the product would look like and getting commitments for people to buy it when it was available so that we could show that there was actually customer demand for it. So there's stuff that you can do kind of in that pre-production process and in the prototyping process where, what they really want to know is that there's people who want to use this. There's people who, your product or your prototype is really solving a problem for them, and that there is demand for it, because they're not going to fund something that nobody wants. So it's really just a process of helping people imagine them and getting to the people who don't know about your product and who don't know that they need what you have. And so that's a lot of the kind of the business side of things that we were working on in parallel.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to the group to try and answer any questions that the audience has. But just to conclude for you, Ellen, what is the advice that you would give your earlier self?
Go figure out manufacturing earlier, and be a lot more bold with that. Like, talk to a lot more people, and you really have to. Well, I guess, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That was a big one for us, making sure that we weren't spending too much time trying to get it perfect. And so, just put out something that's good enough that you can learn from. I wish we had gone to China a lot earlier just to talk to manufacturers and learn what that process looked like. But yeah, and then I see there's a question in the chat for that. So I can address that real quick as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go to the general. We'll start answering, but go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it looks like the questions around IP protection, engaging kind of end users and groups. So with patients, when we were talking to them and we were doing user research, we didn't sign NDAs. Again, we didn't do a lot of product previews, and we didn't go into enough detail into the product to really be in NDA territory. So we could describe at a high level what we were doing, but we weren't showing them the specific things that we were patenting, which is kind of very specific technical details. We could say, okay, we're using magnets to detect this, but we're not saying exactly what we're patenting, because, the patent world, it's very, very carved up. And so what you're actually patenting ends up being pretty specific. We did sign NDAs with anybody who is a corporation or a business, and a lot of them, just as a matter of course, we were signing NDAs with them. My general take is that if someone's going to rip you off, like if a big company's going to rip you off, they can do it regardless of whether or not you have a patent in place. And so you just have to be conscious of look into the partners that you're working with, make sure that they have a good track record for not doing that, and for honoring their NDAs. And you can see that, have they been sued by other smaller companies for doing this? And if they have, be a little bit more careful and be cautious about what you tell them. But in general, everybody was fairly good about signing NDAs and sticking to them. So it wasn't too difficult to get NDAs in place with our partners. But with patients and individuals, we didn't bother with that process, and we were just careful about what we did end up sharing.
Excellent.
I would add to that, JR. I mean, because it come out twice now. You don't. I mean, certainly, intellectual theft happens. I've encountered it, and it happens, but it's not that common. It really depends on the industry. Some industries that are very super hyper competitive will happen more. The biggest culprit right now is players like Amazon, where they copy your technology and they don't even charge for it, so they can get away with it because they're not charging you for it. They include it as part of their bundle. So unless you are in most industries that it happens a lot, you tend to find out about it in the newspapers, in the news, or just by talking to people in the industry. So you, yes, in some industries you have to be super careful. In the majority of the industries you don't. An NDA, when you're working with a company, is understood. Don't be fixed on just using your own NDA. Most companies, because if you're trying to talk to an established company, they have a large legal department. That's very cumbersome. So you need to learn to read theirs and sign theirs. That's a lot easier process when you're working with a new anything. You have to be careful with working with overseas. That doesn't mean don't work with overseas, but if they do, just understand in the Far East, things are shared a lot more than in America. So the idea of keeping things separate is just understood differently because they share everything, right? That's just the way they are. They don't do it out of, I don't think they're trying to rip you off. It's just they're used to sharing. We're not. And so, if you feel you have something very unique, you can avail yourself of a lawyer earlier on. Maybe the best thing you can do if you're worried about it maybe is get a freedom to operate from a lawyer. It doesn't cost you as much, and he'll tell you what bunch of patents are there that might be related to your industry. Or you could try to do it yourself. Now with Google Patents, you can do a lot of digging yourself. So, don't make it your top priority. The ideas, there's more ideas than products that make it to market. Ideas are easy. It is the implementation and making it a reality is difficult. I mean, you heard both Daryl and Ellen talk about all the difficulties of prototyping and getting that to work. I mean, that's what's valuable is once you have your first customer, then you have something of value. Until you have a customer, it's very hard to quantify that value.
Great. Well, and I have a question in here about, so you have a product and you need some help or you want some help to co-develop that product and bring it forward. Do you have any advice about how you make the selection of a partner in business and development?
It depends. Ellen found one right away, but it depends. You have to find some. I would say make sure that you have especially when you're early on, that there is a fit in mentality and that you're going to be able to work together because you're going to be partnered to this and you're giving away some of your intellectual property as soon as you bring a partner. It makes it easier. You can split costs. You can do a lot of better things with more than one person. You are giving away some of your own property by doing that. So just make sure that you know who you're getting together with before you sign or give away any of that property. There's no right or wrong answer for it, really. I mean, some people start with, like Ellen did, just I have a problem. I'm going to find a group of people that I like working with, and then I'll figure out a solution. That's one way. There's hackathons. There is startup weekends, for example, that are based on that idea. People go there with their ideas. Everybody votes, and then you can find kind of groups that form that have common mentality. And so if something, and actually I see here in the call, John Fitzpatrick, I think one of his many companies started that way. It was at a startup weekend. And so that's one way that works. Another way is if you have, depending on your personal income, you can find people to work for you, whether it's students at universities. Many students are looking for extra work, whether it's companies like mine. I certainly help several startups where we engage in contracts for mentoring, right? And we do like 6-month engagements, and I'm there to serve as an advisor. Or you outright find somebody to design it for you. That happens often as well. So it depends on your first what your goal is for your company, and kind of how do you want to fund it, really, at the end of the day.
Great. And there was a question about laying out the original process for discovering the problem. This is something Daryl mentioned, so I think I'm going to start with you, Daryl. And can you just lay out how you discover the problem that you then work on developing a solution for?
Well, what I do is like just kind of like Eric, you. What I did was with my first idea, so I can make it plain and simple, was I got surveys and I had my prototype, and what I did was I had the price, I had, was it a good idea, what would you sell it for, what improvements you would make on it, and I got over my first project, I got over like 3,000 surveys right down the street at Yale. The British Art Museum, I was right under there. And it took me like a week and I got over 3,000. And I took all of those surveys and it helped me fine tune the product so that when I found my investor almost 2.5 years later, I was ready for him because I had a nice product, I had a nice prototype, I refined it. I did like Eric said, I used my own money. It took time for me to get to where I had a product where people could look at it and understand what I was talking about. And it's just a process. It's a trial and error thing. You have to basically use other people's insight, and they'll 9 times out of 10, most people will give you the answer, not really knowing that you're asking that type of a question. So I threw my idea out to a lot of people just so they could twerk it, tweak it, and tell me what their opinion was. And I got a lot of ideas. Actually, you get a lot of new ideas when you do surveys and when you just ask people in general. You'll be surprised the answers that you'll get back from people just asking them what they think about the product for face value. That's basically what I did.
Great. Well, we are at the time of 1 o'clock, and so if any of you have just any closing advice, we can quickly do that. But we'll let others know that they can, depart safely. For those speakers that are willing to hang out for a little bit after, I think there might be some interest from the group in asking some questions informally. So if you're able to hang out, please do, and we can have a short discussion after the formal proceedings. But any closing statements as we wrap up? Oh, looks like we lost Eric. His audio.
I'm happy to. Just go out and try it. At the end of the day, it's an exciting world we're in. It is feasible for people to launch their own product. There's so many platforms now that you could try it. It's hard to do by yourself. Some people like Daryl can make it work on a regular basis. I prefer working in groups. So I would say find like-minded people like you to help you. And there's lots of mentorship opportunities as well. Just at MakeHaven, we have a business mentor. I am there as a mentor for product, and there's all kinds of mentorship product. The state of Connecticut has a very great innovation program that's mentoring. If you're in biomed now, we have a biomed hub, which we didn't have when Ellen started, which provides a lot of resources. So there's a lot of resources for you to get started and going. So I would say give it a go.
Mm-hmm. Great. Maybe Ellen, do you have any closing remark?
I would say at the end of the day, it's all about people. Whenever you make something, someone's going to buy it, someone's going to use it, and so thinking about the people that you're designing for, but also the people that you're working with. And so, it's a lot of it is be open, listen to people, get feedback from them. Whenever you're designing from your own experience, you can really only talk about, what you would like. And so really a lot of what we did was just trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes, trying to get direct input, and just trying to make sure that, for us, it was much more of like a service thing. How can we design the best product for these people to live their best lives?
Great. And Daryl, did you have any closing advice statement?
No, not really. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yep. We can hear you.
I just say do what you have to do, and just get your product or your service out there. Just talk to people and be more, be diligent about what you need to do. Don't be scared. That's the last thing you can do is be scared.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you making the time to share what you've learned and the advice, which hopefully will inspire and inform those that come behind you in developing great prototypes that turn into great products. So that concludes